Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin with Jurassic Magic, and this is one of my last YouTube videos for Tarkir Dragonstorm. I may revisit some of these commanders in the future. Definitely going to visit Reanimate because it's a commander deck I've already built myself, and usually from time to time I revisit commanders that I personally love. For example, Sauron the Dark Lord or Gishath's Son's Avatar. However, this is a video not about Reanimate. This is a video about Teval the Balanced Scale, and a lot of people are very hyped about this commander, and for good reason. You could go the landfall route, you could go with a graveyard strategy, or if anything else, you could go with a druid themed deck, putting a lot of druids in the deck and get the value out of them, especially because you're making a lot of druid tokens with Teval the Balanced Scale, and obviously that's a good direction. However, I want to go on a different route. I'm not going to choose any of those options that I mentioned. They may have some similar game plans, but in a general sense, I worked this deck around Gyruda, Doom Adepts as a companion. And before everybody writes angry comments down below, this is not the most optimal deck you can make with Teval. However, I think it's more of a fun approach because Gyruda is basically acting as a secondary commander in the deck. You get to only use him once though. If he gets removed, it doesn't go back to the command zone like Teval. However, it has a very fun strategy that kind of goes along with what Teval wants to be doing anyways. And so there are some great synergy between these two. And just to kind of break down this video, I will first focus on some options that we could put in the deck that could really get our game plan going, because everything has to be even converted mana cost. There are some routes that we could take to make this a pretty good commander deck. Then after that section, I will be discussing clones, because whether we clone Gyruda on the battlefield or we clone some big creature, we're going to gain an immense amount of value. Then following that, I'm going to talk about some of the best creatures that you could reanimate in this type of deck. And then on top of that, we could clone them too if Gyruda is not the most optimal option. And so now without further ado, let's get it started. Let's talk about this deck. So let's first read Teval, then Gyruda. Teval the Balanced Scale for 1 black, green, and a blue. It's a legendary creature, spear dragon with flying. Whenever Teval attacks, mill 3 cards. Then you may return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. So overall, it is going to provide ramp for us when it attacks, as long as we get a land into our graveyard. Not only that, when cards leave our graveyard, we get to make a 2/2 token. And that's why it does synergize with Gyruda Doom Adepts, because for 6 mana total, it is a companion, so you have to start your deck only containing even converted mana cost cards, which Teval itself is a even mana value card. It has an enter the battlefield trigger of each player putting the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. You get to put 1 creature card with an even converted mana cost from among those cards onto the battlefield under your control. So what's nice about Teval and Gyruda is the fact that Teval, when it attacks, you could go ahead and put another land onto the battlefield, and on the next turn, if you have Gyruda in your hand, you could cast it immediately. It kind of goes on curve in a weird way. And of course with Gyruda, you're milling cards into the graveyard, and if you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield that was milled that way, you also get a trigger Teval, putting an additional 2/2 black zombie creature token on the battlefield. So overall, that is pretty nice. Of course, you want to have a lot of different staples that are 2 CMC, 4 CMC, 6 CMC, really anything that's even converted mana cost. Most likely there's going to be a lot of 2 CMC cards, especially in the early game, that you want to put in the deck. For example, ramp options, Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 visits are all 2 CMC, and I know I mention them in every single green deck, but they're the staples that I always put in my own decks because they're cheap, efficient ramp options. Other ones that you could utilize in your deck is Sakura Tribe Elder and Skull Prophet. Both of these are great because Sakura Tribe Elder, you just have to sacrifice it to put a basic land onto the battlefield, and Skull Prophet has 2 modal options. It can tap for mana, or it can mill 2 cards. And while we're milling a ton of cards, you don't want just 1 land entering the battlefield with Teval, you want multiple. That's why Head Shredder is another excellent choice. Whenever it attacks, you may mill 2 cards, and whenever 1 or more land cards are put into the graveyard from your library, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and it has a crew 1 ability. And what's nice about this is the fact that you are making a lot of 2/2 druids. You could just crew 1 with Head Shredder with 1 of them, so that way Head Shredder can attack and you may mill more cards, along with Teval swinging in. Most likely you're going to be putting a ton of lands depending on how much land you put in the deck. Other things you may want to consider in this deck is cheap, efficient interaction like counter spells and removal. removal, and protection spells. Luckily, a lot of them are even mana value. For example, Assassin's Trophy and Terra Sunder are each equally very good. Another very interesting option, because we are making a lot of black zombie creature tokens on the battlefield, is Lethal Scheme. You get to convoke it, so basically it can act as a free option if you have enough zombies or other creatures on the battlefield. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. Each creature that convoked this spell connives, and that's honestly very good because of course we want to be filling our graveyard and putting the right type of cards in our hand. Of course, there is a ton of counter spells. I don't need to go over every single one of them. Counter spell itself, or even Mana Drain. Mana Drain is a little bit of an expensive option, but I think it can be worth it because we do have a lot of big cost creatures in the deck. It almost acts like a ritual after we counter that spell. This is going to be more of a graveyard-centric type of deck, so we want ways to mill cards into our graveyard outside of Teval and Gyruda. We want a little bit of reanimation. Gyruda can reanimate creatures from our graveyard onto the battlefield, but there might be other ones that might be stuck in there because we picked some other options. So there are some classics. Ripples of Undeath is great in any graveyard strategy. At your pre-combat main phase, you mill 3 cards, and you can pay 1 and 3 life to put one of those cards into your hand. That's excellent value, all for 2 mana. Grizzly Salvage or Grapple with the Past are cheap instant spells that can help us mill, all the while putting a card into our hand that we want to put in. But I would say one of the better mill options that you could put in your deck is Titan's Nest. This is incredible. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. So it's nice if you want to get something better on top, all the while putting something else in the graveyard. Not only that, you exile a card from your graveyard, add 1 colorless mana, spend this to cast only a colored spell without X in its mana cost. So this is pretty insane. It's just a repeatable way of us just exiling 1 card at a time to make more zombies on the battlefield. So again, there are a ton of engines where we could put stuff into our graveyard, but we also want to reanimate them, and we don't want to just rely on Gyruda because it's just a one-off effect. We want multiple of those type of effects like Animate Dead or Dance of the Dead. These can reanimate a creature onto the battlefield. Another option you may want to consider is Rise of the Witch King. I absolutely adore this card, and I think it's even more perfect in this type of deck. Each player sacrifices a creature, so it's like an edict effect. If you sacrifice a creature this way, which most likely we're going to be sacrificing a druid token, you may return another permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and would you look at that, we get to basically just replace that druid token with another one, with another creature too. I also wanted to highlight another card that is actually from the pre-con, Afterlife from the Loam. This is one insane reanimator target. It has Delve, so we could just exile cards from our graveyard to pay the cost. For each player, choose up to 1 target creature card in that player's graveyard, put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. They're zombies in addition to their other types, so if every player, including yourself, has a creature, well, that means you get to put your 4 creatures on your side of the battlefield, potentially all just for 3 mana. And correct me if I'm wrong, with the Delve cost, you are exiling cards from your graveyard, so that will trigger Teval because cards are leaving your graveyard, and then after the spell resolves, when you put creatures on your side of the battlefield from your graveyard, you'll get another Teval trigger of putting a 2/2 black zombie. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is how it should work. And speaking of which, because cards are leaving the graveyard, we want to get additional value out of them. Kishla Skimmer is a perfect option because it is card draw. Whenever a card leaves your graveyard during your turn, draw a card. It'll only trigger once each turn, but again, it is a card advantage engine. But if you want treasure generation, Karu Goldkeeper is incredible. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard during your turn, you create a treasure token, and this is just really busted. All at an uncommon level, we're going to be making so much treasure tokens from cards leaving the graveyard. Obviously, there is a infamous combo that a lot of people are talking about with Tortured Existence. You just keep returning cards from the graveyard to your hand and then discarding them back and forth. You're using that treasure to pay into that black mana cost to make infinite 2/2 black druid zombie creature tokens with Teval. Of course, since this is a Gyruda deck, Tortured Existence wouldn't fall in line with the companion theme, but if you're going outside the companion theme, this is basically a great combo to win the game with. I just don't have it in here, but I just wanted to mention it. So yeah, that's the general strategy as far as ramp, the graveyard strategy goes. But now I wanted to switch sides and talk about clones because of course Gyruda has a great ETB. We want to use that ability multiple times. Something like Spark Double and Sakashima 1000 Faces can enter as a copy of Gyruda and get that ETB, especially without sacrificing the original Gyruda because the legendary rule will be evaded with those 2 cards. You can also use some other ones that don't necessarily evade the legendary rule like Phyrexian Metamorph or Phantasmal Image. They're simply just another clone option. Phyrexian Metamorph can clone any artifact or creature on the battlefield, which can be pretty useful, but I would say the best clone out of them all is Auton Soldier. It's also another one of those clones that evade the legendary rule, but not only that, the Auton Soldier copy will also have Myriad, which can be quite brutal, because if we clone Gyruda and we swing at one person, we're going to be making 2 token copies of Gyruda on the battlefield that are also not legendary too. So we're going to get multiple triggers, multiple things on the battlefield, whether they're reanimated creatures or they're 2/2 zombies with Teval. Also, I will say about 90% of these creatures essentially have great ETBs, so you may want to have some flicker options like Thassa Deep Dwelling or even Deadeye Navigator, because if you blink some of these options like Gyruda or other great creatures with ETBs, you're going to get more insane value. Speaking of big creatures, which ones do we want to run in the deck? Well, whatever one really fits your fancy, of course. I went with more creatures that have great ETBs to kind of follow along with the other strategies of clones and flicker spells, but there are also other ones that can be pretty decent too. One that is a straight up monster and a complete menace is Colossal Grave Reaver. This is 8 CMC, but if we're reanimating it with Gyruda or other means, this can be quite insane. Whenever this creature enters or attacks, mill 3 cards, and whenever one or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from the library, put one of them onto the battlefield. So this was in the precon, so if you bought the precon and were upgrading it, you may have seen this in the deck. But this is probably one of the more insane reanimator targets that I've seen in a long time, because you're just reanimating more creatures on top of that. Because whenever you're putting cards into the graveyard that are creatures, you get to just put one of them onto the battlefield. That's quite literally broken. If we even have Gyruda enter the battlefield, we already reanimate one creature, but another one went into the graveyard. We get to put that one directly onto play if Colossal Grave Reaver is in play too. Plus, not only that, we are putting cards from the graveyard to the battlefield, so that will also trigger Teval. So Colossal Grave Reaver, possibly one of the best cards in this deck. Other ones you may want to consider is like Hoarding Broodlord or Burning Rune Demon. These are basically just tutors. With Hoarding Broodlord, you exile a card that you search your library for, and cards you have in exile basically have Convoke, and that's perfect because with Convoke, if we have a lot of druids on the battlefield, that spell could essentially be reduced. I also find Burning Rune Demon to be pretty valuable in the deck too, because you can search your library for 2 different cards with 2 different names, and an opponent will choose one to go into your hand and one to your graveyard. So most likely your opponents will put the best card into your hand because they don't want it in the graveyard, because most likely will reanimate it later. Because we're also in a little bit of a lands theme, Lemra Bellow of the Woods is also another excellent option. When it enters, mill 4 cards and return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So if there are a ton of lands in our graveyard, that means, well, hey, we just get to put them all into the battlefield. Forget about the reanimator strategy, we could just cast our big giant threats right away. And not only that, its power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. Most likely we're going to have a ton of lands on the battlefield, so this one is absolutely cracked. Another fun one from Fallout is Screeching Scorchbeast. I love this card so much. Whenever it attacks, each player gets 2 rad counters, and whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, you create that many 2/2 black zombie mutant creature tokens. You only do this once each turn, and most likely with Gyruda, milling 4 different cards, most likely some of them may be lands, some of them might not be lands. So depending on the situation, we may get a ton of zombies on the battlefield. And if you wanted to go a little bit more degenerate, and if you decide, okay, I just hate my play group, I don't want to play with them anymore, I just want one more game with them to make them hate me forever, Jin-Gitaxi's Core Augur will help you get there, because at the beginning of your end step you get to draw 7 cards. However, each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7. You're getting all the value of drawing so many cards while your opponents are going to be scraping to get more cards. Again, this one's an extremely mean one, and it is a game changer. I just wanted to throw it out there because, of course, it's probably one of the better reanimator targets that you could choose from. And if you want to close out the game, I did want to mention one very good reprint from the set, and that's Craterhoof Behemoth. And you're probably thinking, why would I want Craterhoof Behemoth in a reanimator strategy? Well, since you are making a lot of 2/2 zombies along with creatures on the battlefield, most likely you're going to have a huge board. Why not just end the game by putting Craterhoof Behemoth directly into play, whether it's reanimating it or just playing it directly? Swing out for victory. I know that's a very cheap way of winning, but again, this is a little bit of a go wide theme because of the zombies that we're making, so it can provide a great win con on the deck if you want to close out the game. However, that is going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Teval the Balanced Scale. I don't believe anybody really has brewed around Gyruda with Teval, but I think it's a great fun strategy that might push the deck building limits, because of course it has the restriction of 2 CMC, 4 CMC, and all those even converted mana costs in a general sense. I think it definitely provides a great restriction because you have to take out Soul Ring. A lot of people love to play their Soul Rings, but in this deck you can't if you have that restriction. So it does breed a little bit more creativity, at least in my opinion, but I would love to hear your thoughts down below. How are you building Teval? And is this a strategy that you've seen people brew around before? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.